Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from Japan, Japanese language English subs, released in the year 2017, directed by Takashi Hirose, and this film is called Brutal. So Brutal is about a serial killer who brutalizes these women that he takes off the streets, and the reason why he's taking these women is that he wants to find his soulmate. He believes he's very misunderstood by the opposite sex, and the more he becomes disappointed, the more violent he becomes towards his victims. So he kills them, disposes of their body, and he keeps on repeating this until he's going to find that woman. But unfortunately, the longer it goes on, the more disillusioned with life he's becoming. But then one day he comes across a victim that just might be his match, but unfortunately for him, might be just as crazy as he is. So whether or not that's the case is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Brutal. This movie is very appropriately titled. This is a typical exercise in Japanese insanity that throws the viewer in a downward spiral of pure psychopathy. Not only psychopathy in the horrible violence, but psychopathy in a very twisted sense of humour that the film has, and the very twisted look at love. So this is a film that was very interesting, but unfortunately it fell down the trap that a lot of extreme horror films out there fall into, and that's something I'll go into a little bit later. But what I liked about the film is that really twisted sense of love, looking at it from a very different perspective, the perspective of sexual frustration, the fact that someone can't connect with the opposite sex and having those really extreme consequences. I thought there was an idea there that was actually threatening to come out to actually make this an extreme horror film that was worth watching. I thought as though the very grindhouse feel that the low budget brought to this experience, I thought was fairly decent. So in some instances, as far as the editing is concerned, it actually looked a little bit higher in the budget, but there was also issues I had with the editing that actually brought that down. So every positive that this movie has, unfortunately, is complemented by two negatives that just bring it down. So it's basically one step forward, two steps back. And that was a great shame, because I actually thought as though this is one of the rare occasions where that idea was there, but the focus is all the wrong areas. And so this is a really, really horrible film as far as violence is concerned. It's very graphic, so you have to be very careful going into it. If you are a fan of extreme cinema, it's going to cater for all your needs, but if you're only a part-time horror fan, this one's going to shock you and it's probably going to mentally scar you for life. And there's also moments at the end of the film where this really twisted sense of humor comes about, and I couldn't help but giggle a few times, and I felt really bad for it, because it's not something you should really giggle with, but it's unlike anything that I've seen in a very long time. So as far as really twisted romances are concerned, Brutal definitely takes the cake as one of the more extreme experiences. So the movie goes for an hour and 6 minutes. Now, it's not a very long film, but unfortunately, this is where the issue with the extreme side of cinema is concerned. Even though it's an hour and 6 minutes, it still felt a lot longer, because the movie was on repeat after about 20 minutes. This would have been a lot better if it was only a 20-minute short film, because it would have got to all the bases, tied up all the loose ends, and you wouldn't have noticed the fact that it's just deja vu. And I thought as though that was a massive issue. And so the movie is focused on giving you these horrible scenes of violence and torture, but it's not really focusing on the potential that it had. And that potential was giving you just a really twisted side of psychology as far as someone who's very sexually frustrated. So on one side you have that potential, and because the potential is not realized, I become very irritated and very disappointed in actually what the movie was focusing on. And unfortunately, the focusing on this extremity was an issue as well, because the editing and the violent process was actually quite poor. The movie is very disjointed and very jarring, so whenever something horrible is happening, you can't really get a good view of it. So as far as extreme horror fans are concerned, you might be a little bit disappointed by what you get. Yes, the practical effects look very disgusting, and it's a very, very dirty film, but the editing process I thought was very amateurish. So you have that grindhouse feel that the editing brings, but that's brought back down by the really horrible editing as far as the violence is concerned. So there are some moments of violence that are very hard hitting, but then there's the next scene is a moment of violence that just didn't feel right. It felt like there was moments that were cut out and you're missing something. So all the positives are just followed up by a negative that just keeps on bringing it down. The movie wants to get above water, but there's something always just bringing it down. It just can't loose itself of all that weight, and it just brings it down into what was just a really disappointing extreme horror film. If you go in there just wanting violence, then you're going to be catered for. But for me, going into the movie expecting a really brutal film is something that I got, but unfortunately I just couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment, because there was room there to actually make this an extreme horror film that was worth it, because the overall idea was there that was just really twisted and very uncomfortable. But because it's not focused on, this is where a lot of these extreme horror directors fall down, and unfortunately that is the case with Brutal. So overall, for Brutal, going to give this one 1.5 stars. Maybe you'll like it a bit more than I did, but for me, I just felt as though it could have been right up there as far as one of the better extreme horror films. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.